and gentlemen, let's welcome to the stage the man of the hour, Mr. Marty Eisenberg.
Hello.
Hi, Marty. So, this is not only a Beast Machines title, Transformers Beast Machine. Why don't we start with, and you did cover a little bit of this yesterday, but why don't we start with how you got involved with Transformers Beast Machines?
Yeah, basically my agents set up a meeting with Mainframe and Hasbro, summer of 1998 maybe, and we, my writing partner at the time, Bob Skier, and I, were supposed to be writing some scripts for a show called War Planets, which I think over here was called Shadow Raiders, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not Transformers. I'm looking at you, but it's not Transformers, so you have no idea.
And I'm not even from the UK, so.
But I believe that was it. And the late, great Len Wein was the story editor on that. Len Wein, the creator of Wolverine, among other important, and Swamp Thing. A couple of little comic book creations. And he was a friend, and we hired him to write on a couple of shows for us, and he wanted to return the favor and said, oh yeah, we'll give you 4 scripts on War Planets. And then Dan DiDio, who was the head of Mainframe, said, oh, I got this other show in the works, I think we want to get you for that. So you're not writing for War Planets anymore. I was like, well, thank you for taking assignments out of our hands. And so we took the meeting. We had no idea what the meeting was going to be about. We were just meeting with Dan and Mainframe and some other people, and then it was there that we learned that we're doing the follow-up series to Beast Wars. And I have to be honest, at that point in the 90s, we kind of had a little bit of a snobby attitude about toy-based shows, because we hadn't written any toy-based shows. And my background was at the Fox Kids Network, and Fox Kids Network wasn't doing any toy-based shows, or at least shows that had toys as their entry point. Obviously, there were a lot of toys made out of things like Batman and X-Men, but they didn't start out as toys, and that was always the dividing line. It's like we will never do toy shows. And that all changed with the coming of a little show called Power Rangers. Anybody heard of it? So suddenly there was a lot of money to be made, and there was a lot of money to be made for a particular gentleman named Chaim Saban, who eventually took over the entire Fox Kids Network. And then it was anything goes. Then if you want to do a toy show, we'll put it on our network. So suddenly they had an opportunity to take the Transformers franchise, which had only been in what we call in the States syndication, which was basically sold to individual stations all across the country, but what they weren't wasn't part of a nationwide network. So this was the first opportunity for Transformers to be on a national network. So it was a big deal for Hasbro, but it was also a big deal for Mainframe, and they actually had another show on ABC. But they were looking for writers who had a good relationship with Fox Kids Network, and Bob and I had a very good relationship with Fox Kids Network, not the least of which was because I used to work for Fox Kids Network, answering phones. So they had hired another famous comic book writer by the name of Mark Wolfman to do the initial development, and then because the Fox wanted writers that they felt more comfortable with, we were hired to do the gig, and so basically Dan DiDio's consolation prize for Marv was to give him those episodes of War Planets that we were supposed to write, and then also guarantee him a certain number of episodes on Beast Machines, which we also had loved to work with Marv plenty, so we were happy to work with him. So that's my long-winded answer.
Yeah, no, that's good. I wouldn't have to ask you any more then. So, once you were on board, what sort of themes were you looking to explore? What sort of ideas did you want to play with when you were doing Beast Machines?
Well, one of the main things, and I talked about this a little bit, I think yesterday or in the earlier panel today, was we had a negative reaction to how Megatron was being portrayed in Beast Wars. You know, we liked the complexity of the show, and we liked the characterization of of all the individual characters. But we just felt like Megatron was doing what he was doing for no other reason than because he was evil, and he loved being evil. He was doing things in the name of being evil, and we were always of the mind that no evil character thinks that he or she is evil. They are the heroes of their own stories. So, why do evil people do evil things? Because they think they're doing good, and they're doing things for pure and altruistic reasons. So, because we had what we were handed is it was going to be the maximal characters who had these beast modes, these pseudo-organic modes, but now the bad guys were going to be more traditional vehicle transformers, which they call Vehicons. So immediately we liked that because there's a very good distinction between the good guys and the bad guys. I mean, there was a pretty good one between the Maximals and the Predacons. And the Predacons were mostly lizard, reptile
bugs and dinosaurs.
Yeah. But this one we felt that was an even stronger visual contrast. So playing off of that, we decided to make Megatron more of a machine purist, and just believing that anything that was beast mode or organic was a contamination that needed to be eliminated, and that Cybertron needed to be purified. So that gave him a good, strong motivation to basically commit genocide.
And if I could interject, it also gave a nice bit of self-hatred for himself, because he still had that beast mode for season 1.
Exactly. So that was sort of emotionally what's driving him as well, and making it really a less rational motivation. So it really we made him about as evil as you can make him, and about as dark.
I mean, there was almost literal cannibalism by season 2 when he tried to consume the sparks of all of Cybertron. I don't know if you remember that.
I was not as heavily involved in season 2 because what happened was about midway through season 1, based on the success of Beast Wars and Beast Machines, Mainframe and Hasbro decided, let's do another show. And let's take this character who's very well known in the UK, but really not known at all in the US, which is Action Man.
Any Action Man fans?
A few. One or two. That was about as many as we had in the States. After the show premiered. So they were tasked with making Action Man for the American market, and they're looking for we need another team of writers like Marty and Bob who can do the same quality of work for Action Man that they're doing on Beast Machines. And I think finally it was Dan and DiDio who said, well, why don't we just get Marty and Bob? They're two guys. One of them can do Beast Machines and one of them can do Action Man. So I had kind of taken most of the reins on season 1 and Beast Machines. So after a little back and forth, Bob and I decided, well, why don't you take second season of Beast Machines, and then you can have your say, and that can be your vision, and I'll try and get Action Man up and running. So and Action Man was a particularly difficult development process. It really took up all of my time, and so Bob just kept cranking out all of season 2 of Beast Machines.
So I'll try and stick to mostly season 1, but season 1 had a number of elements that were, I think, pretty bold choices, sometimes contentious ones. But I personally really like the idea of Optimus Primal as a leader whose heart, his spark is in the right place. His moral center never drifted, but he was sort of fundamentally wrong about some things. So how did that choice come about?
Well, I think it's always good to really have your protagonist and your antagonist be reflections of one another. So that was the impetus, is that they are both kind of extremists and fundamentalists in their own way. And really what season 1 was thematically was about the dangers of extremism. And even though you are theoretically right to ignore everything else around you in the single-minded pursuit of your goal, was ultimately going to destroy you. And it ultimately does kill off, in a sense, it kills off Optimus Prime. I think we were toying with the idea that it would permanently kill him off, and that Cheetor would take the reins and sort of understood what his mentor was trying to do, but be able to strike a better balance. But as I said yesterday, I think Hasbro gave us the most pushback on that because they tried killing off an Optimus before and it didn't stick.
What I find really amusing about that, because I've never heard that before, is that in season 1 of Beast Wars, they tried to kill off Optimus Primal and not bring him back, and Hasbro said no, so by, I guess, season 2, episode 3, he was back. So it's funny to see that repeat itself.
Well, yeah, by the time we got to animated, I figured, let's just kill him off right away and get it done with. It seems to me that's his superpower, is he gets killed off and resurrected, so let's play into that.
And then probably the other contentious one was Rhinox as Tankor, Rhinox the villain. So how did that decision come about?
Well, there were a couple of factors in that. First of all, we were given, here's the team, and our question was, well, wait a minute, Rhinox and Silverbolt were on that ship when Megatron was strapped to it at the end of Beast Wars. What happened to them? And, we got a lot of shrugs, and maybe we'll figure out something. And I said, well, this is a follow-up to Beast Wars, right? So this takes place after Beast Wars. It's like, yeah, but it could take, thousands of years after Beast Wars. Well, does it? Well, I don't know. So, as I was saying yesterday, there was a lot of indecision about what was actually going on and how much continuity, we were going to follow from the previous series. And I also heard subsequently from Bob and Larry that there was a similar thing going on about how much Beast Wars was going to share the continuity of G1. And obviously they got there. But I think in the first season of Beast Wars even, there was not consensus on, does this take place in the same universe as the previous series. So there was that similar lack of commitment. So we were kind of going in blindly, and we're like, okay, we're just going to throw them into this situation, and we'll figure it out as we go along. And what's the explanation? Why were Tankor and Silverbolt missing? And I don't remember, it may have been Bob, it may have been me, or something that we came up with in the room collectively. But just the idea, well, maybe that their sparks were put into the Viacons, and it really, what it did for us as writers is it personalized that slaughter of the entire Maximal race. So, like, it's not just a whole bunch of characters that we never met before. Like these were people that we knew and loved that have been have been put through this. And again, I think the goal was to go as dark as we possibly could go, because we were the guys who were known for writing Batman and X-Men, and Fox was the network known for going as dark as possible and as you could on a kid show, go with it. So that's what we were hired to do.
Yeah, I mean, personally, it really worked for me, but I know that that's an issue that in general, Beast Machines was divisive. But let me put it to the audience. How many people here really love Beast Machines? All right, how many people here just couldn't get into it after Beast Wars? Anyone? All right, fair enough. I think we're self-selecting. I don't think it's a random sample. But
if you come to a panel that says Beast Machines, one would assume that you liked the show on some level. Unless you want to throw things at me.
Well, I think there was a time when, if we'd done a panel called Beast Machines, that people would have come probably just to hear.
Well, people actually did threaten to do that, just that very thing.
Yeah, that was kind of weird. I don't mean to dwell on the negativity. More, it's interesting to me to see how the perception of the show has evolved over time. I think the Transformers fandom is in hindsight, a lot more interested in the show than they were in the immediate aftermath. So.
Well, and I think this was only, at least in the North American market, this was only the third Transformers series to exist. So, as more and more Transformers series were made, the pattern became very clear that the fandom would hate whatever was new, and the only thing that was great was the show that immediately preceded the thing that was on the air. And then once something new came in, then that was crap, and then the old thing was. So I think over time,
we've gotten the rhythm. Although I got to say, with Transformers Animated, there was a little tiny backlash when the first images came out. But I think as soon as the first episode came out, they were right on board. That was my perception as being someone in the
I think a lot of people were right on board. I think the people who hated it on first sight warmed up to it more quickly than they might have to other previous series. But I think there are still people to this day that just couldn't get over the look. That to them is not Transformers, and that's fine.
Yeah, well, no, absolutely, personal preference. All right, why don't we throw it open to questions? Do we have anybody with a mic? Yes, we do. All right, anybody have any? Okay, we have one right in the front row. Oh, okay. Well, why don't you shout out to me while we're...
It's a small crowd.
It was just, how did Waspinator get back to Cybertron? Because all you saw was a caveman strapped to a catapult,
right,
and then suddenly he was back.
Did everyone get that? How did Waspinator get back to Cybertron?
The answer is we never really wanted to explain it at all. And what would happen, part of what was working with Mainframe is we'd send them a script, and they generally liked really short scripts because they wanted to do their own stuff in it. And most of it was great and exceeded our expectations, but sometimes they throw things in there that we didn't write, and suddenly we had to explain to people. So the whole sequence where the natives are catapulting Waspinator off the planet, somehow they built a catapult that was strong enough to get him to break orbit. We didn't write that. The Mainframe put that in. So I have no idea. I think they just thought it was funny. They weren't explaining it either, but they put in something that raised even more questions.
Can you think of any other instances where they kind of surprised you?
Well, there was really a key instance because we opened the show with the Maximals in their original Beast modes, not even in the final Beast modes that we saw in Beast Wars, and that was really there was a visual thematic thing that we wanted. We wanted them to be at their most organic looking, or their most beast looking, and be pursued by the most machine looking things, so that the delineation was clear. And obviously, story-wise and thematically, it was a lot about organic versus technological, and ultimately the solution was the blending of the two. So we wanted to make that statement right away in a visual way, but we really didn't have any explanation for why they were in those original Beast modes. And that was another one of those things like, just put them that way, we'll figure it out later. So when we did finally get around to the flashback episode where we see what happened, what we wrote is that they just take what we wrote is you see them in the form that you saw them at the end of Beast Wars, or whatever that form was called. And then they take such a pounding from the Viacons that, like, with each massive explosion, they kind of devolve into whatever the previous version of their beast mode was, and then another big explosion, and they devolve again. And I guess Mainframe decided that's too difficult to animate. We'll just give them some gas that turns them back to their beast mode. So again, that was one of those things where we were getting the animatics and the rough cuts and going, what the hell?
That's great. All right, more questions? Yep.
Did you ever see any of the stuff from Japan? Under Japan, they did their own version of animated. They did a lot of Transformers things as well. Did you ever get a chance to see whatever differences they may have done over the years?
Are you talking about like fan fiction?
No, like their version of like say Transformers animated, their own Transformers.
Whose version?
Oh, Japan.
Oh, Japan.
Yeah.
I saw, the only thing I saw was the new main title that they did. But other than that, I haven't seen the Japanese.
Yeah, they had some manga for Transformers animated, and of course there were a couple of cell-based Japanese Beast Wars series, but I'd be surprised if you ever come across them.
I may have seen some images from the manga, but
They were quite nice. All right, more questions? Oh, we got some right there. All right,
Yes, I'm sorry. What was Beast Wars Megatron first name? Because you know that Megatron had, Beast Wars Megatron had before a different name before it took Megatron's name. Or is it something that I understand?
I don't know because we weren't part of Beast Wars. That would be a question for Bob. Unfortunately, Larry has passed away. So I don't know. I do recall like him saying that he took the name of Megatron to honor the Decepticon, but I don't recall anything that was in any of the scripts that said what his original name was.
Yeah, and there's certainly never been anything in any of the official canon of mainstream Beast Wars or Beast Machines about that. But I guess my question is, does it really matter? You know, I mean, presumably if he had a different name, it was something that wasn't as important, was it? I mean,
It's the answer to a great trivia question.
all right, more questions. Oh, I think so.
Somebody has.
We have a mic.
So, with Beast Machines being a follow-up to a show that was very successful and ran for 3 seasons, when you were brought on for it, did they tell you was the idea that you had to come up with something that could theoretically run for quite a long time and maybe cut it back if it doesn't take off? Or was it viewed as a 1-season project that would be extended?
I think the series order was for 26 episodes, and we were going to break it down into 2 seasons, and then we'd see. And we did take one meeting over at Fox Kids Network with the mainframe people and some of the Hasbro people. I don't think even the Hasbro people were there. I think it may have just been with the network people, to just sort of spitball some ideas of what a 3rd series could be, and because I was so deep into running Action Man, I didn't have a lot to say at that meeting and sort of nodded at whatever Bob was saying. So I honestly don't remember what we pitched them. I think my idea was we'd sort of send the Maximals into space and explore a lot of the other planets where Maximals had landed and the different alien forms that they had taken, and that was shot down, I think, as being impractical from a production standpoint. And Bob came up with something that they liked, and I honestly don't remember what it was.
And again, what's interesting to me about that is that was also one of the ideas that Bob and Larry had for Beast Wars Season 4.
Yeah. So I think we were honoring that, and just because they had seeded that idea that there are Maximals all over the galaxy, and we sort of we suggest that with Botanica that there was a Maximal that was on a sentient plant world and took that form, and just try to make the universe a little bigger.
I love the idea of a sentient plant transformer. That's so sort of esoteric and perfect.
Yeah, we just wanted to do something weird.
Yeah. All right, we have one over here.
Yes. Speaking about Botanica, is it interesting if you talk some more about the new characters that you sort of developed from scratch for the series? Like, I'm talking Night Scream, Striker, and Obsidian specifically, I guess, and Botanica?
Good question.
Yeah, I think, honestly, Botanica was the only character that I can remember that we ourselves suggested conceptually. Like, I think, certainly, I think Night Scream was in the works, that they did want a bat character, and I think maybe even, we probably came up with the sonic power, because obviously it's a bat, so what else you can get it to? So that was, but there was always plans that there would be another Maximal, a Viacons were already developed as to what they would look like and somewhat of their personalities. Again, you have someone who turns into a motorcycle, you want them to be kind of a biker. And, for Jetstorm, we were thinking like Top Gun, I think ID4 had come out at that point, so a little bit of Will Smith and that thing. I mean, we were kind of picturing Eddie Murphy in our heads, but apparently there weren't any voice actors in Canada who could pull it off. So we're like, well, what if it's more like Matt Frewer? It's like, yeah, we can do that. Brian's not here, so.
Yeah.
Hi. In your previous panel about animated, you said that the toy makers at Hasbro pulled off miracles in regard to the animated toys and what they came up with there. I'm just curious as to what you think of the Beast Wars toys, sorry, Beast Machines toys and what Hasbro pulled off with those. Because universally, they're not normally a very popular brand toy.
Well, the interesting thing about the Beast Machines toys is they came out so much later from, I think we had moved on from the series by the time that those toys actually hit the shelves. I think I had certainly moved on because I was doing action then. But I didn't, the first Beast Machine, the one and only Beast Machines toy I ever owned was a Black Arachnia that Derek Wyatt gave. But otherwise I haven't, I've seen some of the packaging, but I've never actually seen the toys.
Interesting. We can correct that this weekend. All right, more questions? Do you have any? There we go. Some over here.
Clearly a lot of animated stuck with the franchise. I was wondering if there was anything in Beast Machines you kind of hoped would stick, but didn't really?
I wasn't, when we were doing Beast Machines, we weren't really thinking much in terms of longevity. It was kind of, for us, it was kind of a one-off. Just the idea of doing a toy show was very different from what we'd done before. So other than possibly continuing the series that we were doing, we weren't really thinking much in terms of, legacy and what would be, what would carry over into the next series.
Thank you.
Hi, I wanted to ask about your experience with the difference between writing for 3D animation versus 2D animation. It strikes me that you've mentioned that you wrote some things that wouldn't fly because of development budgets, and is it the same experience there with 2D, or are there things where, for example, the poison gas incident wouldn't have been as much of a shortcut in 2D as it was compared to bringing various 3D models?
Well, I think that, and I mentioned this yesterday, the things that we were limited by, and Larry and Bob especially were limited by in Beast Wars, was just the small number of characters that could be used, because it's a very complicated thing to build a character and render a new character. So we were, given a specific timeline of which episodes we could introduce new characters in, and which those new characters would be in, and so there was constant limitations in that sense, and it was very, we looked at this development and we said there's an entire planet and there's like 7 people or 7 characters on it. That doesn't feel very epic. And as I mentioned yesterday, Bob brilliantly said, well, who's to say that there aren't an entire armada of these jets and an entire armada of these tanks and an entire armada of these motorcycles, and they're just mindless drones, and the characters are the generals, and that gave us a real sense of scope. So that was a thing that you could do in CG much more easily than you could do in 2D. So that allowed us to use the benefits of the technology, but it was always a limitation. It was even worse than Action Man, because that nominally took place in the real world, and you needed to populate the real world. So that was even more difficult.
And actually, let me just expand on that for a second. And since we were talking about Botanica before, given how labor and resource intensive it is to make a new CGI model, I'm a little surprised Hasbro let you introduce a non-toy character as opposed to one that they actually had on the shelves. How did that come about?
I don't know whether they let us do it. My guess is they didn't have anything else in the works, so they could afford to do a character that wasn't going to be a toy. Or maybe they may have had some plans, or somebody was saying, well, that would be a challenge. I honestly don't know, other than they said yes.
Fair enough. We have a question over here.
Yeah. I wondered if you had any reminiscences of Larry D'Attilio, who was one of your predecessors on Beast Wars, and I think he did the Waspinator episode of Animated as well. And obviously he died in, I believe, the last 12 months, so just any stories that you have of him.
I didn't work with him directly very much at all. I mean, obviously we picked up on the legacy that he and Bob had created for Beast Wars. And just coincidentally, he passed away the weekend of the last Transformers convention I was at, to TF.Con, back in the spring in Burbank. One of the thing that I remember about working with Larry and Bob, bringing them back for Beast Wars, for animated, that was largely Derek Wyatt's suggestion. Derek was a huge fan of Beast Wars. And he was always the one who was pushing for more, Beast Wars or Beast Machines characters to get into animated. And he thought, would you ever consider bringing, Larry and Bob to do a Black Arachne episode? And I said, well, if it was the right one. And then I figured, well, really, they should be the ones to turn Wasp into Waspinator. So I got in touch with them and said, would you like to do it? And they said, sure. And so we took a meeting in my office at Cartoon Network, and the first thing I asked is, well, how do you guys normally work together? And they said, oh, we never work together. We did everything on Beast Wars separately. We've never done a script together. I said, oh, okay. So Bob took one half of the script, and Larry took the other half of the script, which is how Bob's gear and I used to work, so I understood that. And it was a little jumbled, but we got it together, and what was nice is they brought in, they really played into the mad scientist aspect of Black Arachnia, which is something I'd sort of forgotten from Beast Wars, and we didn't really play into it very much at all in Beast Machines. So I feel like that kind of brought the character back to her roots a little more. The other thing I remember about Larry is he said, don't call me before noon. I'll be asleep.
Any more questions? There's one.
So, just to clarify about the Japanese dub, you don't... Sorry. Just to clarify about the Japanese dub of Beast Machines, you're not aware of how they revealed that Tanko was Rhinox?
I may have read it on a fan site somewhere, but I don't remember.
Jim, can you tell him?
I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Oh, right. Oh, okay. So, in the Beast Wars dub, most of the characters had like a little verbal tick there to their lines. So, when Beast Machines came about, they still had them, and Tanko would just drive around screaming Rhinox's verbal tick at the top of his voice, just eliminating any mystery about who Tanko was from the offset.
I may have read that somewhere, but...
Yeah, that sounds really familiar. It's a different marketplace. They were also pitched a little younger, I think, in Japan, which is why they had a bunch of jokes. Do we have one over here somewhere? Oh, yeah.
Since you were at Cartoon Network for a while, did you ever notice the change in environment there over the years? Because I know the channel has changed a lot since it first started up. I don't know what year you were active.
I had an office there. Sam Register gave me an office in 2006 while I was developing it, and I held on to that office until 2009 when they officially said they were not continuing with new episodes. There was a little bit of changeover, I think, in who was in charge of Cartoon Network. It was the same guy in charge of the studio. I think it may still be the same guy in charge of the studio. But we were such a kind of a strange island in the middle of Cartoon Network because we were part of the studio, but we were doing a production that wasn't owned by the studio. They didn't own any of the Transformers characters. They were just providing their services as an animation studio. So there was, other than some of the initial development, they really didn't bother us at all. They were happy to do it, and the head of Boys Action, who's still there, is a guy named Tram Wixel, his good friend, and he loved what we were doing, so he was like, yeah, just keep doing it. And I credit Tram with sort of nailing the characterization of Megatron. He looked at the pilot script for Nanosect that I did, and he said, you can get a little more of that Scar from The Lion King in him. He's trying to act like he's a good guy. So that sort of nailed Megatron's voice at the time. But really, our fortunes kind of rose and fell on what Hasbro wanted, and really not at all on what Cartoon Network wanted.
Is Sam Register still with Cartoon Network? I mean, he was around for quite a while.
Sam Register?
And Mike Black are the two people I remember that.
Is that Sam Register is head of Warner Brothers Animation. He in the middle of animated, he left. So I think his name may not be on season 3 because he left and took over Warner Brothers. So he was an official executive at Cartoon Network, and then he left, and then he brought Transformers Animated in as an independent producer. So he wasn't working for Cartoon Network at the time. He was the producer on the series.
Yeah, there was another person named Mike Black. He ran it like in the early days. I don't know if you remember him.
Yeah, I think his beat was more comedy, so that wasn't our beat.
Do we have another question? If we don't, do we? Yes, over there.
I know you said before that it was to some degree a bit of a risky move to have Primal as the heroic lead be kind of going down the wrong path. I'm curious, how early on in development did you decide that's the way you wanted to go with that?
I think pretty early on. I mean, the idea. The basic idea that kind of got us the job was the idea that transformation was something that had to be learned and perfected like a martial art. So that immediately put him in kind of a more spiritual place. And then when you add all of the themes of the technological and the organic coming together, it was very much that the first season would be to get the technological and the organic as far apart from one another as possible, and then the second season would be drawing them back together to kind of create this new evolution, which was a very controversial ending for the fans that were purists about, no, Transformers have to be robots, they're entirely robots, they're only machines. So I think it was sort of a natural, organic, if you will, process in coming to that.
What was that upon?
Say again?
What was that upon on purpose? An organic process?
I think yes.
Nicely done. And I would further suggest that we have a question over here, but I would further suggest that the idea that Primal might be wrong on something pretty fundamental is kind of baked into the characterization in Beast Wars. They didn't really play it up, but he did mess up quite a bit. He wasn't Optimus Prime by any stretch. He was a lowly ship commander.
Yeah, and I think that was Larry and Bob trying to do some of the things that I did subsequently with Prime and Animated is make him more relatable and more fallible and a hero who has already reached his heights has nowhere to go. So I think they wanted to give him somewhere to go.
All right, we have one over here.
I think you worked on Gargoyles, I'm not sure which episodes.
Yeah, we did 4 episodes. We did, let's see if I can remember my title. We did Legion, we did Kingdom, we did Turf, and we did Future Tense.
That's good. just your stories of working on gargoyles, and I think you also did the hard act episodes of Batman the Animated Series as well. Just your sort of any sort of stories working on
yeah,
those.
no, Bryn Chandler Reeves did the first two-parter, and then we were brought in to do the sequel to that. And kind of a funny story of how that came to be. The Batman robot was in the script in the sense that it was sort of this ominous thing of if Hard Act was allowed to continue, this is the next place it would be going, and wouldn't that be terrible? And the director, Kevin Altieri, said, Batman robot? We got to do a Batman versus Batman robot fight. So he storyboarded this, added into the book, but it was already in a long script, added this huge, elaborate Batman versus Batman robot fight, which of course had to get cut because they didn't have time for it. So Michael Reeves brought us in and said, and I had seen the storyboard because I was working at Fox, so I was familiar with it, and he said, we have this beautiful choreographed fight, but no room for it, so we want to build another episode around it. So that's how we brought the robot back to life and did a full episode of Batman versus Batman robot.
Gargoyles, especially for Huge Tens, I mean that's an especially good episode.
Yeah, that a lot of fans remember that, and I think that's how we get the reputation for being the guys who kill everybody off.
Do we have one in the back?
Hi, I don't know if you've covered this already, but with Beast Machines, the three Sparks, Frost, and was Waspinator always supposed to be that third Spark, or a third unknown character at that point?
My memory of it was we definitely knew we had to account for Silverbolt and Tankor, and I think that was one of those kick the can down the road, we'll figure out who the third Spark is. And I think there were a lot of people who were lobbying for it. It doesn't matter. And I'm pretty sure it was me who said, wouldn't it be funny if it was Waspinator? That, because Black Arachnia was just so sure that this was the spark of Silverbolt, and to pull the rug out from under that and have it be Waspinator of all people, that just tickled my funny.
I was just wondering, do you have like a favorite character or episode by any chance? Of Beast Machines?
Of Beast Machines? Beast Machines is not as strong in my memory as animated, but I think the episode that I enjoyed the most was the reveal of Waspinator, because in the middle of all this darkness, we got to be really, really silly. And I think my instincts tend to go more toward funny and irreverent than darkness. So that would probably be the one that sticks out to me as the most fun.
And we have about 5 minutes left, so we're going to have time for 1 or 2 questions. But before we get to them, and you can raise your hand if you have one, and they'll find you. But we were just talking backstage about how at one of the BotCons, IDW did a poll about which people would rather see as continued in comics form, animated or Marvel G1. And the response was overwhelmingly for animated, which chagrined the IDW folks a bit because they were there to hype Regeneration 1. But I'm sure everybody here would be interested in animated continuation, yes? Yeah. So let IDW know, please, because that's how it gets done. But Marty, last night we saw something pretty amazing. We saw what would have been, some version of what would have been in Season 4, obviously edited and changed. But if you were going to continue Season 4 as a comic book, would you sort of go in that direction, or would you go more along the lines of what you originally wanted to do before Hasbro sort of said, no, you can't, said on Cybertron, no, you can't, you have to change the cast around?
I think honestly it would depend on how much time I had. And I think if I had an infinite amount of time, I might try and do more the Cybertron set version of it. But I think because at least the springboards for all of those stories already exist, I would probably lean toward working those stories as best I could. Until I actually sat down to do it, I couldn't give you a definitive answer. I feel like I have those stories as a framework if I were going to do it. But like every other season on animated, we would have a framework, and then something would suddenly come to life in a way that we hadn't anticipated, and that would change the whole direction of the season or the series. And there were a couple episodes like that where we're still headed toward the end, but suddenly we've opened this can of worms that's really interesting and we should explore it. So I think Autumn Boot Camp was the one in the second season where it's like, wow, we created this huge backstory about Long Arm and Shockwave, and then there's this whole other dangling thread about Wasp that, obviously we had to come up with, a red herring that we think that Wasp is the spy, and it turns out to be Long Arm. But like, wow, we need to pay that off. That's a really interesting story. So it's like, keep that in your back pocket. And the same way that This Is Why I Hate Machines just, opened up this whole idea of what is going on Cybertron, and, being able to, use names like Metroplex and give them a purpose in this universe, as opposed to saying, hey, we want to do Metroplex, see if you can squeeze it into an episode. Suddenly it's like there's a huge, there's huge fertile ground to get stories out on Cybertron. All we do is, wouldn't it be funny if Captain Fanzone ended up on, the guy who hates machines more than anything, ended up on Cybertron. Hilarity ensues. And we had no idea that all of the, the machinations of getting the codes out of RC and all of that sort of, developed as we were working out. Like, we didn't even know we were going to do the backstory on Omega Supreme. I always kind of had it in my head that was his backstory, or a version of that was his backstory. And my mantra on Omega Supreme is, what if the atom bomb had a soul? But I figured we're never going to be able to tell that story. That's way too dark.
That's just a fantastic logline, though.
Well, I think it cribbed it from the Iron Giant, because I think Brad Bird's was what if a gun had a soul. So I have the stakes to make it.
All right, sorry.
Yeah. So just to finish the thought, which I've already lost my train of, was that because we were asked to do something older and darker for season 3, I said, well, I got this backstory for Omega Supreme, and kind of, laid it out. And they're like, great, perfect, do that. So suddenly we had all of this fertile ground that we could use in season 3 that we weren't planning to use at all.
That's amazing. All right, I think we do have time for one last question.
Hey, Sarah, for voiceover work.
I paid for her college. I think that's a pretty good fee.
Yeah, I wish I could get a deal like that. All right, ladies and gentlemen, Mr.